Get started. Am I right to get started? Great. Thanks, Maria. I was about to say good morning, but we've actually ticked over to afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stacey DeCalma. I work here at QCOSS in our sector capacity team, doing lots of different sector capacity activities, including this series of COVID learning exchanges. This is our second last one for the year, so we're nearing the end of this series, and I've been really excited about the topic that we're exploring today. And I will be introducing Jo very shortly. A few housekeeping things. We're really happy to make this is a learning exchange, so we're really happy to have discussion, questions, comments. So please utilise the question, the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, or the chat function. If you're having any, probably best off putting questions in the Q&A box. If you have any technical difficulties, just let us know. We've got some really friendly helpers, IT guru type people here on the line today who are able to help you with anything if you're having any trouble. So let us know, and after Jo's had some time to speak and go through her presentation, we will have some discussion time. So jot down any questions you have, because we'd really like to make the end part of the session quite engaging. Before we go any further, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I'm on today. That's the Yagara and Turrbal people. I'm here in Brisbane. I'd also like to acknowledge the Darumbal people of Central Queensland, on whose land I was born and raised, and the Yugambeh people, on whose land I raised my own family. Right on the fringes of Logan. So I'd like to pay my respect to their elders past and those present, and acknowledge the continuing connection to the land and the sea and the waterways. Now, Jo has a really impressive background with lots of different things that she has done. So I'm very excited about the rich conversation we're going to be able to have today, and hearing about the learnings that she has gleaned from the most recent work that she's been doing. Jo Thichener is a proud Gubbi Gubbi woman living on Boonwurrung land and working on Wurundjeri land in Melbourne. Jo is the team leader of the engagement and delivery team at the Healing Foundation, and has been leading healing initiatives, including the COVID Resilience Project, working with Stolen Generations organisations, the Queensland Healing Strategy, and developing resources to improve social and emotional wellbeing outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. Jo has lots of other experiences that I think add a lot to this perspective that she's offering today. So without any further ado from me, I'm going to hand over to Jo, who's got some great learnings to share with us. Thank you very much, Jo, for coming along as our speaker.
Thank you so much, Stacey, for that lovely welcome and introduction. Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here today. I too would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land where I'm meeting and where we're all meeting on today across this country of ours, to acknowledge, for me, the Yallikat Willem clan of the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. This is the land where I live and work on at the moment, working from home, but normally I would be working in our city office in Melbourne on the Wurundjeri land. So I pay my respects to all elders, past, present and emerging, and also to acknowledge my ancestors as well. I'd also like to acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be here today for this learning exchange, and also to acknowledge the Stolen Generation survivors for their strength and their resilience, and for sharing their lived experiences with us. We really appreciate that sharing that they provide for us as well. I'd also like to acknowledge any of my Healing Foundation colleagues who are here today as well. So thank you. And I'll just bring up my presentation for you. So I'd like to acknowledge this beautiful piece of artwork was commissioned for us by Cultural Grounding. The artist is Elaine Chambers Hegarty. We obviously provided a brief for our artist to come up with this artwork for us as part of the impacts of COVID on Stolen Generation survivors. So a little bit about the Healing Foundation for those of you who may not know. We're a national Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organisation working with stolen generation survivors and their families. We enable opportunities for them to lead their own healing nationally, to amplify their voices, for them to be able to lead the way for truth telling, to share their lived experiences with us all so that we all may learn and grow and enable the healing journeys, particularly in the space of being trauma aware and healing informed. We walk alongside communities to let them create their own pathways to healing, to enable survivors and families to find their way home, and to shift the narrative from talking about the impacts of colonisation and forced removal of children and intergenerational trauma and the effects that we know that that has on communities, to be a narrative around intergenerational healing and what we can do collectively as a nation to sort of progress that journey forward for everyone. So March 2020, COVID-19 impacted on all of us in a range of different ways. We were very fortunate at the Healing Foundation through our funding through the National Indigenous Australians Agency, NIA, to be able to provide some funding for stolen generation organisations around the country. So we were able to fund 18 stolen generation organisations once the impacts of COVID started to become very real at the early stages of last year, to provide them with some funding for the much needed practical support that they had to provide on the ground for stolen generation survivors and families and communities across the country. We gave them the scope to be able to sort of lead their own healing initiatives within their communities, and some of them were able to come up with these amazing, innovative and creative projects, as well as the practicalities of some of the care packages and the wellbeing hampers and things like that that they also provided for communities. In the second half of last year, we were able to sort of lead conversational pieces around COVID resilience, bringing people together to share that learned experience of what was happening on the ground, from Broome to Melbourne, from Darwin to Brisbane to Alice Springs, across the whole country. We brought people together to have these virtual yarning circles. So we held 7 virtual yarning circles around COVID resilience in the second half of last year, and we heard from 15 different stolen generation organisations sharing their experiences. We also had some conversational pieces just around the long-term impacts of COVID on communities, and that was in the later half of last year, and obviously here we are a year later and we're still feeling those impacts very much on a daily basis across the country. We also engaged Maramali to lead a research piece into the long-term impacts of COVID on communities. And we also provided some counselling support for stolen generations organisations and their staff. So some of the emerging themes, not surprising, through the COVID resilience yarning circles that we held at the Healing Foundation with stolen generation organisations, and also through the research piece into the impacts, were around re-triggering trauma. This overwhelming sense of isolation and loneliness that stolen generation survivors and families and communities were feeling. There was a deep impact and a profound impact from grief and sorry business and how that was playing out across the country. There were issues around connections and also disconnections to family, culture and community and country. There was also the challenges, very real, of technology, and we know that from all of the many Zooms and Teams and conversations that we've been trying to stay connected as best we can virtually. There were also some challenges around vulnerability, financial distress, family pressure, cultural load, those impacts as well playing out across the communities. So as I mentioned, some of the practical supports that stolen generations survivor organisations were providing on the ground were those very much day-to-day needs that were coming up in terms of phone credits, providing food hampers, wellbeing and self-care packs, activity packs, ways to engage and connect with each other. Conversations were also had around the lack of supports in terms of family and caregivers, and even support people being available sort of on that day-to-day basis to connect people together. Obviously, there were greater impacts for some in regional locations. There were also impacts by border closures playing out across the country. Some of the organisations shared with us about the impacts of not being able to do daily business and daily practices face-to-face. So accessing things like telehealth services, while obviously it was important and significant to keep communities safe during this time, there were concerns around that not being a culturally appropriate way, and that might be an enabler to hide some health issues for some people at different times. There was also a range of cultural workshops that happened, which were wonderful to share and wonderful to be a part of. Some creative opportunities to share traditional art and weaving, campfire yarns and songs, storytelling, and creative ways to sort of access things like bush healing and medicine as well. So through the research that we have undertaken with Maramali, with stolen generation survivors, not surprising, there were some issues around access to support. So 90% of survivors that we spoke to experienced stress on their important and significant relationships with family, community and carers. There was also 50% who raised concerns about access to and fears for access to health services, for doctors and hospitals, as a very real fear at the time. Also not surprising was the impacts on health that stolen generation survivors reported at the time through the survey, and 75% reported a decline in their mental health and wellbeing. 60% reported a decline in their physical health as well. 66% described and explained that they were feeling greater stress during COVID as well, and that was having an impact. Mentioned it earlier, but obviously it was a key theme that came up quite significantly through conversational pieces and through the research as well. And here Uncle Michael Welsh, a survivor from Kinchilla Boys Home in New South Wales, and his poignant quote at one of the COVID resilience yarning circles was that it feels like being back in Kinchilla, except this time it's worse because we're without our brothers. So there was this sense, this overwhelming sense of being under control again. All of these rules and regulations were playing out and re-triggering trauma for stolen generation survivors. Identity and culture and connection was another key theme that came up quite significantly, and 90% of survivors said that they felt disconnected with their family, with community and culture. I mentioned earlier as well the impacts of grief and sorry business, and some of the virtual yarning circles started with a sombre moment of silence and reflection to sort of recognise and acknowledge those who had passed away to the dream time. Some of the stolen generation organisations said that they'd been having funerals almost every fortnight, which was really hard to hear and obviously really sad for communities. There was obviously the ongoing challenge of not being able to connect as communities in terms of going to spend time with family, to be together, to support each other. There was an overwhelming sense of the surreal aspect of funerals happening online, and that inability to be able to hold space. And then some conversations also sort of turned into how can we be more culturally appropriate as we hold space for each other and come together grieving in a virtual sense. So there were some interesting yarns around ways that we can do that and ways we can come together to be there. There was also that sense of the compounding aspect of grief and how that was playing out, which was also another re-trigger for many survivors and families. Some of the aspects that were talked about through the virtual yarning circles were things like Zoom rooms in a positive way. How can we bring people together to connect? Some of the yarning circles that we had, we were able to sort of facilitate some smoking ceremonies, and there was some welcomes where we had 1 or 2 people present at the yarning circles where they could do an official welcome to country, which was really important and significant. Accessing bush medicine and healing was another way that people spoke about in terms of coming together and healing. Some of the organisations were working on some creative responses in terms of meditations and things like that in language. It's another way to keep people feeling grounded. People even spoke about, you know, the ability to show land, to show country, to show the sea, to show the rivers, to be able to just show elders and survivors and community members who weren't able to go home to their own country, but were able to sort of see aspects of country within that virtual space. There was obviously challenges around mixed messaging, and that continues to be a very real challenge today as well. We're getting that message from across New South Wales, across Victoria as well. People saying that the mixed messaging and the restrictions and the border closures are obviously having an impact. And just as well to note that some communities almost felt a sense of it's not as hard for us here as it is for you there, and conversational pieces like that came around as well. There was also confusion at the start around why do we need to stay at home in Northern Territory and WA where there weren't so many cases as well. So in Alice Springs, NPY Women's Council were one of the organisations with a creative response who developed a meditation in language, in Ngangkari language, through the Smiling Minds app. And they spoke strongly about meditation as a way to connect to the bush, to create that state of mindfulness. And it's a beautiful mindfulness app if anyone would like to sort of search for that one as well. So that sense of disconnection to family was really strong. 88% of stolen generation survivors felt that strong disconnection with their family, kinship, ties, community. The disconnection to culture was really significant, and that came up in conversations, particularly around sort of Reconciliation Week and NAIDOC Week last year, but also this year as well, with events being cancelled, postponed, rescheduled. That created a lot of angst and a lot of disappointment in communities as well. The lack of visits from, as I said, not just family, but it was the caregivers and the support people as well that people were relying on, that was felt quite deeply. On a positive note, many spoke about, and it was the first time for some elders that they'd actually started to use things like FaceTime to connect with their family. And there was a significant number who said that that was a great way for them to feel connected and still engage with their family. So one of the participants in the survey, one of the aunties, spoke about, as a grandparent and matriarch of the family, we provided moral support to our children, FaceTime connections, and then some of the practical needs. You know, the great toilet paper shortage of 2020 will be something we may laugh about in years to come, but it was very real and very frightening, again, for a lot of survivors and a lot of people in community who weren't able to get the practicalities of what they needed. But there was also a sense of rallying, of people coming together, putting together all of those packages that they could to get them out to community where they needed them. 70% talked about the increase in cultural responsibilities, that cultural load, COVID fatigue. There was layers upon layers of impacts that stolen generation survivors were feeling at that point in time. But this sense of being drawn on was really strong as well. I spoke earlier about the challenges of technology, and as I mentioned, it's been hard for all of us to sort of reconnect in this way, even harder for those who are vulnerable, who've got outdated devices, who don't have access to the latest technology. That was a very real challenge for many people. Some of the stolen generation organisations were able to use their funding to provide tablets, create things like instruction sheets and how to get people on the ground locally to sort of set those up for people as well, so that they could connect. There were some conversations and talks were had around, you know, again, the benefits of technology in a positive way for things like games, word games and crosswords and other things digitally that were a way for people to connect and engage their mind in a positive way to sort of reduce some of those significant and chronic health issues. Lots of the conversations around were how we can continue to ensure that we do no further harm for the communities where we're working and to keep them safe in that cultural way, in a practical way as best we can from that working from home and restrictions of movements of people. So the sense of isolation and loneliness was really significant for many survivors. That was one of the most significant themes that was coming through. And just to note there that nearly half of those surveyed had said they felt this deeply. The not being able to do things in the way that we would normally do things, to be able to hug, to connect, to touch, to express ourselves, that came through quite significantly from many of the virtual yarns that we had. The restrictions hard on elders, unable to see family and friends, and those regular check-ins that I mentioned before as well. The other one that came up a bit was around this too much time for people to be at home alone, to think and overthink things. And again, that caused some of that re-triggering responses. There was an acknowledgement it was good to come together in the virtual space, and that was a good way to continue to have the conversations that were important across communities as well. So 70% acknowledged that they were feeling trapped in their own thoughts, which was a concern as well. Some of the organisations then went into action to create some activity packs. So again, sending out some, colouring in kind of activities, some mindful activities, some crosswords, games and things to survivors and communities at home, so that they could kind of have something as an alternative to sort of channel some of that creative energy. Journals were also shared as well, and greeting cards, and they were really well received in communities too. This sense of the old days coming back and the memories of past being controlled by the government were another couple of the responses that we were hearing through the surveys. Many of the strong advocates for stolen generation survivors, the organisations, were talking about the vulnerability factor. And this is a group of people who are already extremely vulnerable, were already enduring significant economic disadvantage before COVID, and realising and recognising that that was going to continue to be in place after the COVID had passed. And obviously we're still sort of working through that now. Concerns of elder abuse and financial abuse. There was concerns around sort of, things like JobKeeper, while it was there, that was good. What was going to happen when that stopped? Staff burnout and COVID fatigue was another thing that many of the stolen generation organisations brought up during the yarning circles. And conversations around what we can do to continue to provide opportunities to support the wellbeing needs now and into the future. So through the survey that we undertook last year, but also more recently, we've sent out a survey to all of the stolen generation organisations who received funding from the Healing Foundation. And this is more recently from the survey from stolen generation organisations, talking about the positivity of the online yarning circles as a way to come together, and just an opportunity for elders to be able to sort of sit in that space with each other, to hold space for each other, to have these important conversations, to ask some of the questions, to debunk some of the myths as well around the misconceptions and misinformation that was being shared around. So it was an important space to come together. We talk about resilience and strength, and we know that we have 65,000 years of strength with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples sharing their ancestral wisdom, in enduring and surviving and thriving through, so many, experiences during that long sustaining culture. It was very heartening as well to hear from some of the elders on some of the virtual yarning circles who talked about going through previous pandemics, the depression, the wars, and how that helped them deal with this current pandemic. And I think for everyone else who was in those virtual yarning spaces, it was a bit of an eye-opening kind of conversational piece around, here we are. Last year it was only 6 months, now it's sort of a year and a half in, but that's still not as long as some of the long-standing pandemics and wars of some of our elders, of what they've seen and how they've responded during those times. I think was something that a lot of people gained strength and reflected on their own resilience in that space as well. And there was also conversations around just acknowledging the significant aspects of culture being a contributing and protective factor for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, the importance of acknowledging and recognising the connection to country, the significance of that connection to land, sea, waterways, kinship, spirit, law. All of those were conversational pieces that we had in those yarning circles. Again, reflected in a couple of quotes from a couple of the survivors who participated in the yarning circles. Aboriginal people have always been resilient. And then talking about some of the activities, the painting class has helped me to build my confidence again. And I really enjoyed the weaving from Sister Kate's and Kuta Girls, a couple of the organisations that we supported. So one of the conversational pieces was around the healing journey, and that's something at the Healing Foundation, obviously we are committed to leading that healing journey for stolen generation survivors and their descendants and for communities. So 87% of stolen generation survivors said that COVID had negatively impacted or delayed or stalled their healing journey. And we're committed to working with them to talk about ways that we can restart that healing journey, how we can bring people together in a way, in a trauma-aware, healing-informed way, to continue those conversations around what we can do to progress people on their healing in their own time, bringing everyone along as we can, when they can. So the Healing Foundation continues to provide that level of support for stolen generation organisations. The engagement and delivery team is planning to continue to have yarning circles, not so specifically around COVID, although obviously the ever-present impact that COVID is having on everyone, it'll probably come into conversational pieces, but also around some themes, around the connections to country, the connections to culture, ways that we can do things better. What are the ways of being and doing? How can we bring that cultural wisdom and knowledge into the conversational piece that will be able to sort of strive new pathways forward? So some of the things that worked and what we were hearing and what came through the survey were the significant benefits of receiving the care packages. So this year as well, many of the stolen generation organisations have continued to provide those care packages for communities. It helped them to feel like they weren't forgotten, improved their health and well-being, that connection to culture, maintaining the healing journey. They were all sort of significant benefits of care packages. Just that sense of someone was there thinking of you, and we got really positive feedback from communities around just how something like that could make such a significant difference, and why it's so important for that to continue. Journals, as I mentioned, were really valued by stolen generation survivors as well, and things like greeting cards were really popular and important ways to connect as well. Some of the improvements and suggestions for things that would continue to help and enable people on the healing journey were more art supplies, more culture stuff to bring in native food recipes, Dreamtime stories, more activities. So we'll take that on board as well. And the stolen generation organisations are already coming up with new and innovative ways to continue to sort of share some of those things with their communities. Again, more recently from the survey with stolen generation organisations, this sense of providing good, solid advice, the importance of vaccinations, and being safe so that we can continue to thrive as a culture. You know, that real fear about COVID having the potential to decimate entire communities if it's not kept under control. A very poignant reminder about that vigilance, that we all need to be incredibly vigilant in our own health and well-being and how we support stolen generation survivors. So stronger together is one of the key themes that kind of came out from the conversational pieces as well. One of the uncles from WA had a reflection on the new normal you know, and again, it came up many times in conversations. It's like, well, the old normal wasn't working. We need to create a new normal. You know, we need to be able to do things better, and we need to take time to reflect on this global pause and think about what next, what's going to be best for our people, for our communities, to ensure the ongoing celebration of culture. To tell the stories of strength and resilience and sort of find hope in those conversational pieces as well, and to share the lived experiences from survivors so that that will enable them to continue on their healing journey, and also to bring others along on that healing journey. To reframe that narrative from that deficit sort of focus to a strengths-based, hope-inspired kind of conversational piece around what intergenerational healing looks like, and making that a normal conversation that everyone wants to engage in. And to consider ways to strengthen our connection to each other and to community and to country. And to recognise that culture is at the heart of everything. And that's it from my little presentation for you all. Just obviously some website links there in terms of further information that you might like to access after the Learning Exchange today. So please feel free to go to the Healing Foundation website at healingfoundation.org.au. There's a page for the COVID Resilience Project. You'll be able to find the impacts of the COVID research paper as well there from Maramali. We've also got a recent addition to our suite of resources, a new animation that talks about intergenerational healing and how we can improve the social and emotional wellbeing outcomes for First Nations children. And that was a very real conversational piece with stolen generation survivors about wanting to create a better future, not just for their children and their grandchildren, but their great-grandchildren as well, and into the future.
That was great. Thank you, Jo.
Thanks, Stacey. Thank you, everyone.
I know there's a couple of comments in the chat already, so I'll go to that before I start anything else. Jasmine has asked if you know what natural medicine or bush medicine they were sharing or using.
Yeah, look, there was a few different ones that they sort of shared, and they shared some photos of as well. Can I remember off the top of my head exactly? There were some recipes that were shared around at the time, and some traditional methods of healing, some sort of smoking ceremony kind of different Indigenous plants were used. Yeah.
That sounds amazing, really good. And Chris has asked whether or not we can have a link to the Women's Council app. We might put that in the post-event email if we can.
Yeah, look, absolutely. It was really beautiful to hear the meditation in language. Obviously not knowing the language myself, but there was just something very healing. You felt a sense of being there and being present. And that was something else through the smoking ceremonies, even though it was virtual. You got a sense, you could really feel it sort of, coming through. And it was a powerful way to still feel that connection.
Yeah, beautiful. We'll find the link to that and put it in the post-event email.
Sure.
Along with, we've recorded the session today for everyone, so we'll send a link to that, and we'll send these links in the post-event email that Jo has shared throughout the presentation, including the link to the report, so you can read that in full and see all of the detail of that project and the learnings. Jo, there was a few things in there. I'll just remind people, please put your questions or any comments in the chat so we're all able to see it. I'm happy to continue the discussion. You shared a few things that I think that we can really learn from as far as the sector goes, that we're delivering human-centered services, and it's been obviously a huge challenge during the pandemic is how to have a sense of that connection while using technology. Obviously the first hurdle is actually ensuring people have the devices and the resources to actually participate, and then it's having to try and recreate spaces using technology like this that we're using today, and trying to foster some of that connection that does usually happen face to face. And you've shared a couple of things like having the smoking ceremony online. Are there any other things that you have found as far as process and creating the space online goes that we could incorporate into our own service delivery?
Yeah, look, definitely setting the tone at the start of the meeting was really important. And obviously most gatherings in this virtual space do begin with an acknowledgement of country, and obviously that's a significant starting point. Where possible, if it's an elder who can do a welcome, if there's someone who's present on the land, that was a significant starting point as well. Smoking ceremony, obviously, as I mentioned, was a great way to sort of set the tone, but just to create that that space that says at the very start of the meeting that you're all welcome, for one. You're all safe, and we'll support you through this cultural safety by having you and holding you in this space. It was all really about that tone setting to make sure everyone felt safe, everyone felt comfortable and invited and welcome into the space to share their thoughts and their feelings, and just taking the time that was needed. Some of the artwork, obviously this artwork was specific for this project, but in some of the other virtual yarning circles that we had, other people would share artwork. As I mentioned, sharing visually, like, scrolling around to show some of the land and country as well. That was another thing that was really sort of powerful for people to show the place where they were. One of the other things we do at some of the Healing Foundation Teams and Zooms conversations that we have is ask everyone in the chat room to share which country they're on, so that everyone feels a connection. Everyone learns at the same time when they can see all of these names of places sort of pop up as well. Some words in language as well was also very welcome at some of the conversations in some of the yarning circles, and trying to bring a little bit more of that in as well. So some of those just provided that cultural safety net around Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples that were present in the space, but also that learning exchange that sort of brings everyone else on the journey and shows a more respectful way to do things.
And I think as we're getting a little, as you mentioned, at first we thought maybe it was a short stint of time that we were going to be doing things online, and as we've gone along, it just keeps being extended, and we find ourselves 18 months on still using platforms like this to do a lot of our work. I think people are starting to get a little more confident in being able to share the online space with one another. I'm finding in meetings I'm in, people are starting to be a little more confident in sharing their screen or saying something, because they do know how to get themselves off mute now, and we're starting. So I think our online meetings or spaces are starting to get a little more engaging than what they were 18 months ago.
Yeah, and look, obviously there's still challenges for many elders, but it's also really heartening to see many elders and many stolen generation survivors being more comfortable, as you said, to be present in that space, from their own homes, to be able to connect, for aunts and uncles to come together. And it's wonderful and lovely to see that many of them have been able to overcome their fear, as I know with my own elders in my family, their fear of the technology, that, okay, it can work, it does work, and then feeling a level of confidence around that too. And as I mentioned, just like the FaceTime and the messaging, and people becoming more familiar with those kind of apps as well, which is really positive.
Yeah, it's been another avenue for some of the intergenerational exchange of learning as well, hasn't it? Yeah. Maybe the other way. Lou has a comment in here, Joe. I don't know if you can see the chat, but Joe has said maybe sharing the profound story of the link-up services, maintaining connection and innovative practice via holding the virtual reunion for individuals and families, because that story resonated quite powerfully with her. Yeah,
Lou is from the Healing Foundation, works over in Adelaide on Kaurna country. Hi, Lou. Yeah, look, that was a really powerful story when one of the stolen generation survivors was talking about how they so that was Link Up in Central Australia, who was sort of sharing about a reconnection for people that were trying to sort of find their way home, to find their family and connect, and to be able to do that virtually. Some people thought, oh no, that would never work and that wouldn't be you know, an appropriate way. But to hear them talk about that and the significance and the healing that that had was really powerful, and everyone was very, very moved by that.
Yeah.
And I think you know, the rescheduling and the postponing of many reunions and gathering was something that obviously many organisations did, but it was wonderful to hear from Link Up that they were still able to provide some of those you know, reconnections in a virtual space as well. So we're obviously hoping that there'll be more reunions and gatherings and coming together in you know, the months and years ahead, but it was powerful to hear that that could still happen in a virtual space as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it is amazing actually what can be done virtually, and we're probably seeing that more now. At the beginning of the pandemic, we had a lot of postponing or cancelling of many life events, waiting for it to be over. And we've probably come to a place now where we are now just finding ways to do things anyway, even though they look different, rather than indefinitely putting things on hold.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Any other questions for Jo? There's some great stuff in there. I'm just checking the chat. I noticed when someone registered, and I'm trying to think now who it was, but during the registration process, we did take some questions, and one person had said, how can I help? Which I know can be quite a broad question, Jo, so that might make it a bit tricky to answer. But are there any suggestions that you do have for community-based organisations who are looking to either engage with stolen generation survivors or engage virtually with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples? A few tips that they can really do that well?
Yeah, look, the Healing Foundation website, we have some, you know, phenomenal resources from 12 years of the Healing Foundation's journey since Kevin Rudd made the national apology. One of the things we're very proud of is our schools resource kit, which has some very practical ways to engage schools in what they can do to have conversations around truth-telling and healing and walking alongside Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So we're just at the moment adding years 10 to 12 to the schools resource kit. We've got from prep to year 9, and a lot of schools obviously access that resource, and it's a way that they can bring and invite stolen generation survivors into schools to share that lived experience, to tell their own stories from that first-hand kind of way. It's an important part, I believe, in the reconciliation journey for many schools, but organisations and community groups to really kind of embark upon their own reconciliation kind of journey, to really set themselves some commitments for what they can do as an organisation to sort of make sure that they're doing the most appropriate ways to respectfully acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people across this country. So I think lots of organisations, lots of community groups are getting much better at that sort of engagement in that reconciliation and truth-telling space. Individually, I think there's a lot of things people can do as well, and it's great to see some things being mainstreamed, even like Australia Post coming on board with, you know, being able to put the name of country on envelopes as well when people are sending mail. I think that's just a significant kind of step in the right direction. Shows like The Project that will acknowledge country. So for Melbourne, for Nam, for Brisbane, for Meanjin, you know, it's great to see that as well, sort of mainstreaming a little bit as well. Practical needs, obviously there's a lot of grassroots organisations on the ground that are providing those things like the care packs and the food packs, and obviously contributions to grassroots organisations are always much needed in communities. The Healing Foundation, we obviously have the capacity for individuals to make donations for us so that we can filter some of that through to stolen generation survivors and organisations to continue them to do their own healing work on the ground as well. And we're very much driven by that sort of grassroots, on the ground healing. So, there are a couple of practical ways, but learning and, obviously being here and being present today is part of that learning as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you. That was a great answer. And I do recommend everyone jumps onto the Healing Foundation website, because it's actually a beautiful website with lots of different resources on there. So it's a real pleasure to explore that website. Please jump on and have a look if you haven't already checked it out. Just seeing someone else pop up into the, you've got lots of thank yous, Jo.
Oh, thank you.
I just had another train of thought and it jumped out of my mind. What was it that I was going to say? My mother always said, if it jumps out of your mind, it must have been a lie, but it definitely wasn't.
No.
It might come back to me. Are there any other questions for Jo before she goes? There's been some great content. I remember what I was going to say. It was around being really aware of the feelings that can bring up when there's restrictions. That's such an important point, isn't it? To, those of us who've gotten used to lockdowns or working from home, and when we go about our day and we've learnt ways to cope with what's happening. But for those who, for whom restrictions and lots of rules really trigger something for them around that lack of control and feeling controlled, that's such an important thing to be aware of.
Yeah.
And it's such a balance, isn't it? With which obviously, this is what all of our different levels of government are grappling with, is this balance between preventing COVID from spreading and balancing it with the other implications that restrictions have on people and communities in particular.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And, the re-triggering of trauma, as I said, came through so much in terms of the impact that was having on stolen generation survivors and communities. And, we're very well aware of that. And that's why the Healing Foundation is, 100% committed to sort of leading this conversational piece around what we can all do as a nation to sort of be better in terms of how we have conversations that are trauma aware and healing informed, and to sort of lead the way for governments and policymakers, community organisations to all get involved in that conversational piece. Some of the other resources we have on our website that we developed last year as well were some fact sheets for GPs and aged care providers working with stolen generation survivors for what they can do to sort of act from that trauma aware, healing informed way to not re-trigger any further trauma. We're all about trying to ensure that we don't do any further harm in this space. And what can we do? Just those simple things that people might not think about. And I think reading some of that information, it sinks in and you think, oh, okay, well, I wouldn't have thought that, something as simple as, obviously being in an aged care facility that's not in a cultural setting can feel for stolen generation survivors like they're back in an institution just because of the hallways and the beds and things like that. It's fairly simple when you stop to think about it, but not a lot of people take the time to stop to think about it. So I think it's important that we kind of lead those conversations and bring everyone up to that same level of awareness.
And it's so important for those of us who are in policy making or implementation of policy roles, that we have a really wide lens when it comes to writing and implementing policy, because we've given consideration to lots of different people and what the unintended consequences are for decisions that are made.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, there's no questions in the chat, Jo. You've just dazzled everyone with the amount of information you've been able to provide. It was really interesting. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Stacey. And look, happy to have a yarn with anyone who's online after the event as well. My email's jo@thehealingfoundation.org.au. Welcome to reach out and, love to continue the conversation. So I'm sure you'll send out in the follow-up email as well all of those web links. So if that kind of has any questions that come up after the lunchtime session today, feel free to reach out and happy to kind of share that as well. And there is more information around some of the projects and what some of the organisations were doing as well, for those who want to have a little look at what some of the, you know, fantastic stories of strength and resilience were from the Stolen Generation organisations.
Thanks very much. Thanks again to Jo for her generosity in sharing her expertise and learnings today. You can expect a post of an email from us with some of the links that Jo shared, and we'll grab the link for the resource kit and the mindfulness app as well. And if you are interested in attending our final COVID Learning Exchange for 2021, we're going to be having a follow-up conversation with the Vaccination Task Force on the 25th of October with the State Director of the Vaccination Task Force in Queensland, to have a chat about how that rollout's going, and what we're answering some of the questions that the sector still has about the vaccination rollout. So if you're interested in that conversation, please jump on and register for it. We'll be sending the information around that out soon. And we have some questions for you that are going to come up on your screen now. We have a very quick poll, and we use the results of this to make sure we offer the best learning activities that we can. So please let us know how you found today. And I'm always interested to hear from our participants about other learning activities you'd like to see. So our team here takes suggestions, and we're always happy to hear from you about what would make you do your job the best you can. So please let us know if you have any suggestions around that. Enjoy the rest of your day, go well. And I hope to see you online at another activity soon.
Thanks, Stacey. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. We'll stay online for a little bit while we're waiting for you to respond to the poll, but we'll see you again soon. Thanks, Jo.
Thank you.
That was fantastic. Thanks, Jo.
Thank you.
Really good information.
Just catching up on some of the little comments in the chat room, so that was good to read through some of them as well.
Yeah, you got some fans.
Yeah, some of my colleagues there singing my praises. That's nice to see.
It is.
Yeah.
Nice to have colleagues that sing your praises.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that was good.
So that app, can we just find it in the App Store, or do we need to go to a website to find it?
So that was Smiling Minds app, but if you Google NPY Women's Meditation in Language, or I can probably send you the link to it, but
yeah. That sounds great.
Yeah, it was really powerful and beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be great. We'll get that.
There's a short video I know they did that talked about them developing it as well. I can send you that one too.
Yeah, that would be great. We'll get that out.
Schools resource kit. Yeah, it'd be great to send the link to that, and even maybe the fact sheets as well.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah. Cool.
All righty. Well, I'll get those links from you, Jo, and then we can make
no worries
to everyone.
Yeah.
And look, I because I work here at the sector capacity team, and we often have a bit of free rein as far as the kinds of activities we can explore with the sector. And so, you know, if you do some other research, or you do a project where you think, you know, that would be great information to share, always happy for you to get in touch, hey, and happy to provide, you know, a space like this where you can speak to the Queensland, because I know you've got your colleagues in Queensland, but if you ever wanted to, or suggest to them, that they do. I'd love any excuse to work with Chris or Louise.
Yeah, absolutely. And, she's a strong advocate for the work we do. And, obviously there's some great initiatives and projects, and we know we probably need to get them out there so people have access to them a little bit more too. So,
if you can think of any way that we could help promote anything that you're doing, please let me know. Happy to do that at any time.
Thank you. Do you have sort of newsletters that you send out as well as your kind of,
Yeah, because we're the peak for community services in Queensland, we receive some peak funding from Queensland government. And one of the things we do is maintain at Community Door, which is an online website with lots of different sector information. And we have community news, which is an e-newsletter that goes out fortnightly. So, in fact, Work Up have put quite a few different things in our e-newsletter and website at times. So
Oh, cool.
And we actually did a member profile that featured Work Up, and it was a lovely picture of Louise Villanova and Christine Payne in our newsletter. We remember they joined QCOSS as members, so we a little bit of highlighting the work that they're doing. And because I do human services quality framework support with the sector in Queensland, and the new domestic family violence principles and standards are now being incorporated into the human services quality framework, Work Up have gotten some funding from Department of Justice in Queensland to do some professional development and skilling up for the DFE sector. So there's quite a few intersects between Work Up and the work that I do here at QCOSS because of the quality framework stuff that they've been funded to do. So, yes, it's I'm always excited to work with some of my old workforce council colleagues. We get up.
Well, no, I'll send you a few things through then when I think of, because there are some great things that we're doing as well, and it'd be great to get them out there to community up there in Queensland.
Yeah, awesome. All right, I'll let you go, Jo.
No worries. Thanks, Jacey. See you then.
Have a nice afternoon. See ya.
Thanks. Bye.